Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm going to be honest, it's always nerve-wracking when I have to speak to the Armenian community about the Armenian community, because when you present to a society that doesn't know much, it's much easier because everything you say is new. But I think some of the things I will say today are probably something you already know. So I do apologize if it's a bit of a repetition for you. But the intention was to kind of research a little bit current diaspora engagement with the homeland. So this is a study that was conducted for my doctoral research at the University of Kent, and I've completed it in 2022. So not that long ago, I suppose, so it's still current to a certain extent. And the research focused on kind of second and succeeding generation of Armenian diasporans, so second and so on, basically. And the aim was to understand how homeland is experienced and perceived. Now, before I even start, I want to explain that every time I say homeland, I actually mean it in inverted commas, because we all know that current Republic of Armenia, what I could hear, only 2 people can relate to it in terms of where they were born. So it's not really the origin of majority of you where you come from, and that's the case with diaspora, Armenian diaspora in general. So whenever I say homeland, I mean Republic of Armenia, and I do this, well, you can say on purpose as well, because that's the only independent state for Armenians currently. So it is a homeland, but it is in inverted commas. So you know, basically. I thought before I start kind of talking about research, it might be useful. It seems like it's small, so I apologize, but I can repeat if you need to, whatever is written on the slide. So I thought it might be useful to talk a little bit about myself, so you understand where I come from and my positionality in this research. Because as we know, diaspora is a contested topic, especially for Armenians, and I'll explain why, especially for Armenians. And knowing where the researcher comes from can actually shed a bit of light of kind of their perspective as well. So I was born in Soviet Georgia. It's not Yerevan, but Georgia, but still Soviet, kind of same, you can say. My grandparents lived all their life there. Their parents were, genocide survivors, Mush, Van, Erzurum, but they ended up in Georgia, and I was born there. But majority of my life I lived in Yerevan, Soviet Yerevan, and then independent Yerevan. So you can say I'm Ayastansi, basically. Although I was born in Georgia, it never felt like home. Yerevan has been always the place that seemed more familiar, in spite of all the craziness that came with Soviet times and post-Soviet times, 90s, Karabakh War, and so on and so forth. I actually moved to UK now 18 years ago. I don't know if that's long, short, seems like so long, I cannot even, it seems like another life. I was more or less young, but my move was not planned. It wasn't a very conscious move. So when I came here for about 8 years, I wasn't able to visit Armenia, and for that matter, visit anywhere. So I was cut off from kind of Yerevan and Armenia and Georgia as well. That actually started to do something in me in terms of, what it's like to be away, what it means to be an Armenian, especially far. And to say, when I came to England, I moved to Nottingham, which is bang in the middle, didn't know any Armenian for about 3-4 years. But as it is with all post-Soviet kind of countries. When you hear Russian, something ignites, you think, no, something familiar is happening around you, because you couldn't hear Armenian, there were no Armenians. That's what I thought back then, which is quite interesting, and I'll come to that. So yeah, that's the journey of kind of trying to understand what it's like, what is homeland, what is longing, why it happens. And I've started this PhD not only from academic interest, but also from my personal experience as well. I kind of wanted to understand how I can get to a point when I'm okay with my misfittings. Misfittings is a term that Eva Hoffman, it's a novel, Lost in Translation, she's using to explain her journey in America, and how she became comfortable after, I think, 20 years or so, if I'm not mistaken. So that kind of journey of not quite fitting anywhere, and how you arrive to fitting somewhere in the end. And that kind of sparked a question. I was thinking, how are Armenians who were born outside of Armenia, Armenians who have no connection to the Republic itself, live here for several generations, how do they understand home, what home is, homeland is, and what is their connection and engagement with the homeland? Now again, I understand that there is tons of literature that talks about this, and a bit of a warning sign. Some of the things that I might say, you might disagree. Some of the things you might think, well, not really my experience, but that's the experiences of the participants that I talked to. Because there is no uniform kind of experience of being Armenian outside of the place that you were supposed to be. So there is a lot of literature that is looking at the Armenian diaspora, but what I found is that majority of the literature is looking from the perspective of distance. So by distance I mean what diaspora Armenians think about Armenia, what diaspora experiences are. What was missing to me is that narrative of repatriation. So for someone who's never been to the Republic, has no association with it being their home, why do they go to Republic of Armenia? Outside of the notion of pilgrimage, that we hear a lot in the literature, in Armenian diaspora literature as well. So why do they go, and what is actual lived experience of homeland? And how this can be compared to the experiences of diaspora. So that was the kind of the angle that I took in this study. So I tried to understand what homeland is from lived experience, but also from UK diaspora experiences as well. Everyday lived experiences were particularly important for me. And I was trying to understand how homeland and belonging are formed, challenged, and reimagined in practice. These are the questions. So what role does the idea of homeland play in the lives and worldviews of the second and successive diaspora generations? How is the notion of homeland created and recreated in specific socioeconomic and historical context? And how is the Republic of Armenia perceived and experienced, and what are the experiences of repatriates? So that's why it took 5 years, basically. So let me talk a little bit about kind of how the research was designed. I've started in 2017, and it took me about 4 years. I took a gap in between. It took that long because first of all, I interviewed 56 people. It might sound not much, but if you're doing a long interview with someone and you have to reach a community that is far from yours, it takes time. And I also went to Armenia and interviewed repatriates as well. So those who were not born in Armenia, but who decided to move with an intention, not to be a tourist, but actually who were working there and lived for some time there. So I've done semi-structured online interviews. Semi-structured means, if any of you are not familiar with the term, it means I had some specific set of questions I wanted to ask so I don't lose the focus of the study, but I also had open-ended conversations with Armenians. That's where things got complicated because everything moved wider than I thought, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I came to London, I went to Manchester, Sheffield, and so on, quite a few cities I visited. I've been to Hashem, to the church, you know, both to the Summer Food Festival, and so on. So I've conducted what we call in social science multi-sited visits. So I wasn't doing ethnography where you go, live, come every, I don't know, week, every day to Hashem and observe people. I couldn't do that, but I've kind of popped into different places to try to understand how the community works. I've recorded all the conversations, some of them lasted 2-3 hours. I've gained a lot of kind of sense of people's histories. It turns out people like to talk about their family history, especially Armenians, which is quite interesting. So it was a very rewarding and nice, actually, experience for me as well. Participants were ranging from 18 years up until 70 and plus, actually, I had as well, both in Armenia and here as well. Actually, I had one repatriate who moved to Armenia when they were 68 from UK, which is quite interesting. Only 12 of my participants were born in UK. And remaining 19 were born across diverse locations that included Bulgaria, Cyprus, Lebanon, Syria, and so on and so forth, even Azerbaijan during Soviet times as well, Turkey, and so on. Repatriates, majority of them were USA, and that's kind of the main picture anyway. Quite a big, large number of repatriates are coming to Armenia from USA, especially from New York, New Jersey, Glendale, Wisconsin, and Boston, I think, where the biggest communities are. Others were, again, very similar to UK, Iran, largest number probably from Iran, actually, Turkey, Lebanon, Cyprus, Israel, and so on and so forth. What is quite interesting is that all of my participants, almost all of them, had a multiple migratory trajectories, that's what you would call. So basically, they ended up in several countries before they were settled either in USA or in UK or then came to Armenia, which is understandable. We all know our family histories, you know, when you had to escape to, usually you would end up in Lebanon or Syria and then move on to USA, to UK, and so on and so forth. So very common history. But what that means is that all of my participants had multi-layered identities. There was no constant Armenianness, in inverted commas, that you could say, okay, well, that's what it means to be an Armenian. So it's a big pot of boiling stuff there, you know, from different cultures, different languages, customs, ideologies, mentalities, and so on and so forth. It was quite interesting that none of them said, you know, I'm from here specifically, I'm from UK. They would say, I'm from UK, but I'm from Iran, originally. None of my participants were from actually the Republic of Armenia, interestingly. All of them were diaspora Armenians, whether were repatriated or who were here. So there was those 56 interviews and my field studies when I was attending various events and etc. led to large number of themes that emerged. Some of them you can see on your screen. This is not a conclusive kind of list, but things like belonging, memory, diaspora, dynamics, all sorts, nostalgia. But one that I want to talk today, because it would be endless if I talk about all of them, but one that I thought that is running through all the conversations I had was this idea of being hidden. Or I'm not quite my mind is not quite made up whether it's hidden or invisible. And again, I want to be very careful here because that might not be your experiences. But it was certainly something that all 56 could, they were not clearly identifying that, but it was the kind of the running between the lines kind of thing that was running. And I found that quite interesting because it kind of resonated with me as well. While I was not connected to any Armenian, and even after I was, when I moved to UK, that sense of not quite being known was kind of hanging over me for a long time. And a lot of my participants even talked about, you know, when they are asked, where are you from? They would say, from Armenia, and then, or I'm Armenian, they would say, oh, Romanian. I mean, I'm sure a majority of you experienced that.
Armenian.
Yes, yeah. So that might not mean a lot, but when that happens consistently, it kind of leaves some kind of overhanging, some kind of cloud over you a little bit in terms of what that means actually for you who's living life, not quite being known where you come from. Although you can put your finger on the map and say, that's where I'm from. Even if you're not from there, but at least there is an independent state, right? So, what does that hidden mean? By hidden, I mean that Armenians are in UK, and quite frankly, other places as well, which is quite surprising, are out of sight, you can say, or not readily apparent, despite having a long presence in UK. I mean, we're talking about early merchants and things, I'm sure we'll know about this. So there were various ways that my participants kind of talked about this being hidden or invisible. It's also important to say that it's quite difficult to understand the community when there is no reliable statistics on or demographic of Armenians, especially in UK. I know there was an Armenian survey recently that produced some results, but I think still the data cannot be quite precise. A lot of the times, you know, especially new migrants move to UK, you don't know, they might be living somewhere in Wales and have no contact with you, which I've met few people who actually lived in rural Wales and by accident actually managed to find them. But otherwise they had no connection with any Armenian community or anyone they didn't know. I was the first person they knew who is Armenian. So these things happen. So that limits kind of our data on Armenian community in UK. So as I say, despite this growth, Armenians remain relatively hidden due to the small population size, and I will explain this, and geographical dispersion as well. And the concentration of Armenian neighborhoods as well. Well, you might say, what are we doing here in Ealing, in Acton? You know, we're here. And I know there is a community in London, but what is missing is what's called the thick demographic, basically. Like you would have, for example, you have Chinatown in London. That's a thick demographic of one community being in one place, quite visibly, culturally, and so on. So my participants suggested that there is lack of visibility. Armenians in UK, this is. For example, they said Armenian language signage, community-specific businesses, and recognizable church architecture they mentioned as well. I know we have one, which is Armenian architecture, but still it seems to be hidden away, you know, very small, tucked away, and not readily visible. I think that's what they were referring to. What it seems that majority of my participants said that although there is a community in Manchester, in London, it's not large enough to form a visible ethnic district or ethnic neighborhood. Barriers, they also kind of tried to say, yes, well, it's not many of us, we're not visible, but you know, this is because of economic reasons. Opening a business in London for a small community must cost fortune. Not everyone can afford that. So they were acknowledging being that kind of hidden from the wider British society, but also giving kind of explanation why we don't have that kind of cultural cluster. They repeatedly emphasized scarcity of Armenian shops, restaurants, signage, institutions, factors that limit public visibility. And again, I know we have institutions, but what they're referring to is kind of that, compared to other ethnic groups in UK, they seem to be not that known, even compared to, I know, Russians, Ukrainians, Chinese in UK. So we are tucked away. That's what they were referring to. So this is called supply side of Armenianness. This is something that even in America, a scholar called Vardanyan discussed as early as in 2014. And the argument was that in order for the community to be successful and visible, you need to have that supply side of that ethnic group, which is grocery stores, media, school, churches, and so on. And this can only happen if there is demographic thickness, basically, in specific locations, which a UK community, well, from my participants' perspectives and observations, doesn't have in London, and more so in Manchester or any parts of UK. There was also a line there running through the conversation that multiplicity of our migrations, the fact that we migrated several times, complicates the creation of that trajectory of that thick ethnic kind of neighborhood, because we don't have that one, what is to be an Armenian. We have Iranian Armenian, we have Syrian Armenian, and so on and so forth. So that kind of complicates things a little bit further and kind of contributes to that sense of invisibility. One of my participants explained many needs, for example, can be met through Middle Eastern stores. So why would we even, have something as simple as an Armenian store? If I come from Iran and I need to cook something, I can go to a shop that, I can get my stuff from there and be pretty happy about everything. So again, that's although it seems like a very mundane thing, but that kind of leads to something more than just going to a shop and cooking. Another of my participants suggested that cultural heterogeneity and multiple migration histories lead to limited cohesion within the UK diaspora. And cohesion is something that runs through. So, taken all of this together, so that's small numbers, dispersion, diverse migration histories, economic constraints, and limited cultural infrastructure, all these factors contribute to continued invisibility of Armenians in UK society. As you can see from the quotes, these are quotes from two younger, what you would consider younger generation quotes from younger generation, UK-based Armenians. One of them is trying to explain, London is a very expensive city, so to open something in the center for 14,000 Armenians, it seemed to be not a significant business to pursue, really, right? Which is true, exactly. Another quote is that the community is sort of subdivided into smaller communities. The culture is different. It's quite interesting that this person is referring to kind of social, because this is a young person, so they're trying to explain why they're not socializing with other Armenians. And they would say, European culture, Armenians in London, they like to go for drinks. I don't know, you Armenians from London, if you can confirm that or not, I'm not sure. I'm not from London, so I don't know. so they like to go for drinks. It's a pub culture, it's more anglicized. That was actually used several times by different participants, which is not surprising. I mean, if you're born here in Latvia, it's going to be anglicized. And, Armenians from Armenia, they're more gathered in their houses, and then the European, Armenians from Europe, are more kind of coffee culture. I don't know exactly what that means. So I suppose coffee shops or having coffee at home. So it's what people do makes them hang out with different people. So again, you can see that kind of subdivision into what is called sub-insulated communities, right? Another factor that I thought is kind of contributing to that sense of being hidden is migratory trajectories, as I touched upon, and diaspora dynamics as well. I understand that some of the stuff I'm saying is probably not very, I always get nervous talking about this because it almost feels like I'm criticizing, but I'm not. The whole point is to address what challenges there are within the Armenian community. As I said, the diaspora migration history for Armenians is multifaceted, right? Repeated relocations, which produce multi-layered communities. Most participant families, with two exceptions, as I said, were coming from regions of Western Armenia before escaping the genocide, and then went to Iran, Jordan, Cyprus, later migrated to UK. As I said, the successive movements are creating those cultural layers because you adopt the cultural practices that you're in. It doesn't matter, that you move after to UK. Similarly, you would absorb Iranian culture and then UK culture, and you are this mix of whatever it's called, I'm not quite sure. No, everyone decides what it's called for them. As a result, Armenian communities evolve in different directions. And that's what kind of my participants were suggesting. Not only different directions from the homeland, whatever that is in this context, and from other diasporas, but also from one another within the same host country. And in this case, host country is inverted commas, and it's UK. And this is what happened happens even in USA, actually, with even large communities like, in LA. There are still what Vardanyan, who did study in 2014, says creates a semi-insulated subcommunities. So even in larger, I suppose Russia is a different conversation, but USA, you would have those subcommunities. And this makes the mobilization of the wider diaspora quite difficult. I know we always talk within the Armenian community how we can unite, and that's a kind of the constant conversation, isn't it? And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure, but the reality is these layers, whether we want it or not, of our historic journeys are actually complicating that unification, if you like. This even more is more complicated with post-Soviet times when new migrants came to the UK. Large number of economic migrants. I'm sure those who live here know better than I do. Diversified the diaspora community in UK as well. A lot of my participants actually talked about how that migration from post-Soviet Armenia changed once homogeneous. Again, we have to be careful what that means. And visible was the denial of memory of genocide, and host-land politics as well, especially in the UK. It's
quite interesting that recognition of the genocide remains central for many participants, younger generation included. But there was one difference. They described it as duty to know and spread the information. Now, there are many studies have been done on this with Armenian Australians, I think also in Switzerland as well. And Volvart, for example, conducted a study in 2016 and argues for Armenian Australians that lack of recognition is experienced as failure for acknowledging historical facts that happen. While another study on Armenians in I think it was Switzerland suggests that international silence can leave diasporans feeling alienated and dishonored. I cannot say my participant talked about alienation, but it kind of was there, somewhere in between the lines again. But mostly, again, what they were referring to is that sense of being invisible for that very important factor that needs to be resolved and acknowledged. The invisibility of their history and their voices, and of being unheard. What is quite interesting is that previous literature for first, second generation of diasporans suggests that, being in person, marching, lobbying was very important for that generation. Now it seems that the younger generation is more focused, so there is a shift in focus on educating people on what April 24 is. And this need to inform and to educate is intensified by the absence of recognition within the UK in this case, right? And what we can say is kind of a denial or denialist politics, maybe to a certain extent. I know there is a bit of move every time, they say, well, we're close, but never gets there. So this invisibility also was reinforced by during the war, and my participants talked about UK's relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, and how that puts them again in the position of not being heard, not being seen, and not being known. And this in turn obviously complicates diaspora lobbying, especially was the case during the last war. There seems to be a shift in terms of where younger generation is trying to find that visibility. It's through social media. So during the war, members of the Armenians in UK Facebook group, I don't know if any of you are part of that group, but there are several Facebook groups. Armenians in UK, Armenians in Leeds, Armenians in Manchester, and you name it. Wherever you live, there will be. I've created one, Armenians in Nottingham, only got about 5-6 people, gave up, forgot about it. But we kind of know each other, so that was a good result, I suppose, right? So all these social media sites were used to spread or to educate, and express frustration at the underreporting and perceived pro-Azerbaijan bias in British media. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but there didn't seem to. There were some papers, BBC was reporting and so on, but from my participant's perspective, it wasn't enough. Or it was mainly more focused towards Azerbaijan than on Armenia.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which led to protests, even this receiving almost no coverage. So the protest that took place in London, even this protest, I know, it was a number of people there protesting, and this was, I think, coinciding with COVID, wasn't it? Unfortunately, due to restrictions, I wasn't able to attend. But even that was underreported. And that, again, kind of leads to that sense of, okay, so am I visible to you? Do I exist to you? and again, enforcing that sense of invisibility or being hidden. So taken together, the denial of the genocide, or calling it a genocide, the politics surrounding Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh, and the silence of the host country reinforces Armenians' invisibility in UK, at least from their perspective. And it's very important because memory, and therefore denial of memory, is the principal ground of diasporic identity. I mean, if you think about it, what is a diaspora? When I was doing my PhD, I thought I went mad because the whole theory of memory was so fascinating. Because what you are as a diasporan is actually the result of memory. Nothing else. It's just pure memory. Even if it's imagined memory. You've never been to Western Armenia, let's say, but you've heard from your parents, grandparents. So that recall of something that you haven't even seen. That is what makes a diaspora. And the denial, of course, that means becomes a denial of your history and kind of what my participants were referring to, your existence, right? And again, they weren't really saying they feel invisible, but that what I could kind of depict from those conversations I was having with them. I also, you cannot talk about diaspora, especially Armenian diaspora, and not talk about fragmented existence. It seems to be fragmented from what we understand. And it's not only in UK, but it's everywhere really, where Armenians are. So similar to Armenian diasporas in large urban areas such as, in USA, for example, in New York and New Jersey, participation in community life, in diaspora life, is still very fragmented. It's not like they have a homogeneous community there and we don't in UK. That's not the case. And many of my participants, including those from London, explained that there are practical reasons for this limited or occasional participation. Things like commute, financial constraints, time, family commitments. I can look I'm here for 18 years. I've been here for third time. So it includes everything, financial, family, time, and so on and so forth. So I kind of could understand my participants really well in that sense. I'm very glad, actually, that I've decided not to talk only to London Armenians or Manchester Armenians, but actually went beyond that and talked to Armenians who were in Sheffield, Wales, rural Wales, Leeds, York. So they were from everywhere. And one way I was able to find them was through Facebook. And it was an intentional move on my side, because I didn't want to look into how Armenians only in London feel, those who especially are contributing, participating, because my understanding of the wider diaspora would be skewed towards those who are actively involved, which is not a representation of the whole diaspora. There are so many outsides that we don't know about, and how we reach them, how they interact, how they live their lives is as important as those who obviously are more in touch with, for example, Hashem. So what I understood is that Armenians from different parts of UK who do not have this large support group, they're quite isolated in a sense. So they have limited community engagement. They cannot attend London, obviously, for various reasons and so on. This is the case everywhere as well. For example, Los Angeles, San Francisco. There is a division as well between diasporans, especially new migrants, economic migrants from the Republic of Armenia. And what's quite interesting is that migrants from Armenia do not always want to be included anyway, which talks about subcommunity, that insulated subcommunity as well. There are various reasons for that. It's not wrong, it's not right. It's just how historic journey took us to where we are at the moment, right? So this has been actually studied across diaspora Armenians a lot. I don't know if you came across there are various studies that talk about the divisions within the Armenian community. One of the reasons that my participants discussed their lack of participation was also they feel discouraged and disappointed by cultural differences. When I say disappointed, probably a bit frustrated rather than disappointed by cultural differences between them and other members of community. And this applies to the genocide commemoration as well. So just because that tenseness exists, not everyone is open to participate in something that they consider to be very important to them as well, which I found quite interesting. Only 3 of my interviewees confirmed that they took part in the march that takes place every year in London on April 24, for example. Only 1 out of 56 was regular participant, so attended every year. They all said, recognition of the genocide is very, very important for all of them. And it was something that was, felt from the conversation. But they had various reasons for not participating. What I've noticed is that there was a shift from that, again, participating in person in London and participating online or commemorating online in social media platforms. Younger generation, again, seems to be using other platforms for this, social media especially. And the emphasis, again, if you remember, I talked about educating who we are to foreigners, right, or to the host country. And again, they talked about commemoration as an opportunity to educate what happens and where we come from, rather than anything else. So this is a shift how commemoration is viewed, seems to be a recurring attitude amongst younger Armenians that I've spoken to anyway. They are more interested in raising awareness than simply attending the march itself. This extract from an interview might sound a little bit too harsh, I suppose, but that's kind of how people felt. I want to be pessimistic, but I don't think it can carry on for many years. That's about diaspora community, engaged community. When you come to Armenian school, you can see that there are these very outdated approaches, and then you see that children are not really blossoming. So this is about that kind of diaspora dynamics between different diasporas, where they come from and so on. Again, this might not be your personal experience, but it is for this particular person. And there seem to be quite few of those, of similar experiences. The second one below is about the commemoration. Not so much as attending events or anything, but I send messages to people who Armenians are. We send each other messages, and I also make sure I educate people on the day and so forth. So a lot of them were saying that's more important than mourning. And again, this is after 2015, so a century later, I suppose that changes things as well in terms of how we see things. how is it so far? I'm feeling like I'm talking a lot, and I don't want to, breathe, or you want me to zip it for a bit. I'm happy to do that. But another kind of, and again, this might be something very well many of you came across. Another theme that led to that invisibility and that fracture within the diaspora is what a lot of participants called Soviet mentality. I mean, we've heard this. I have to be honest, I'm from Soviet, post-Soviet country. I was born during Soviet times, and I didn't know about Soviet mentality until I was out of Soviet mentality. So it's quite an interesting journey as an individual as well. And when I was engaged with this, I could, I was like, it was a work, it was a bit of a psychotherapy for me as well. I was thinking, oh wow, there are things that I didn't even notice about myself that many diasporans would acknowledge, and I would be like, that's actually correct, you're spot on. Or they would acknowledge something that I thought, wow, that's far from my experience. So it was a very interesting journey for me as well. So throughout the conversations that I had, as I said, many younger generations said, we want to educate, we want to explain who Armenians are and so forth. I forgot to mention that all of that was almost linked to the idea of effort. So whatever they were saying you need effort to go to London to participate. It takes financial effort, it takes time, it's just an effort. It's effort to speak Western Armenian or Eastern Armenian when you grow up in UK. It's an effort to go to commemoration. It's also an effort to post online and be exposed like that to maybe, someone else from another community that you don't want to be exposed. So effort was also running through, it was a recurring theme as well. And adjusting to Soviet mentality from diaspora perspective was also an effort on their side. And it was an effort from repatriates' perspective as well. So, what do I mean by Soviet mentality? Well, obviously it's, I do not know even how to explain it, but if you were born in Soviet times, you probably know. But that reliance on the government, reliance on the state, not taking responsibility for your actions, and so on and so forth, were part of that Soviet mentality, that everyone owes you, and so on and so forth. I'm trying to be careful here. It's important to mention here that a lot of diaspora Armenians felt that existence of Soviet mentality from Armenians who migrated to UK. So it was something that was quite visible. It was differentiating them from Armenians from Armenia. And these differences include cultural practices, historical backgrounds, political affiliations and ideologies, location, loyalty, and degree of integration to UK society or other host country. All of my participants discussed their experiences of adapting to these differences by making an effort again. So interaction with that Soviet mentality was also considered an effort. An effort is made to adapt particularly to changes that higher stances bring, because compared to all the diaspora, a majority of higher stances who are from post-Soviet territories do not share a similar history of migration, which can be the case. I'm not suggesting, however, I feel like I'm suggesting that, we don't have that overall sense of who Armenians are and so on. That's not what I'm suggesting. There was, again, that idea that we're all Armenians and so on and so forth, but those divisions seem to be popping up all the time in our conversations, right? It's quite understandable differences. For example, in terms of the genocide, although Armenians from Armenia would have the same, like my great-grandparents from Van or Erzurum, we still have that experience of genocide, but some of them don't either. So some of them are actually living there for 10 generations, for example, from Yerevan province. So there are similarities of even genocide experiences, but there are also differences as well. There are differences, obviously, living under Soviet rule, and also later in independent republic, which changes or led to ideological and cultural chasms between them and diaspora. Language was part of that Soviet mentality. So a lot of diasporans talked about Eastern-Western. That was quite interesting to me, because in my perception before I started, I thought that's kind of done. We're kind of not talking about it anymore. But for diasporans, that was very important. And more I spoke to them, more I understood it as well. And after all, it is endangered language for us now. But there are too many studies done on Eastern-Western kind of divisions and so on and so forth, so I will not go into that in too much detail. So let me what I would like to, without going into too much detail, is talk about, again, that invisibility. What is quite interesting is that diaspora Armenians, when they repatriate, right, because they are in that, what they call Soviet mentality, they again feel other to the rest of the those who were born and live in Armenia. So that sense of not quite being seen, heard, understood continues throughout repatriation as well, which is quite interesting. Not to that extent, but it's still somewhere there, because a lot of my participants who repatriated, they had businesses there, for example, they lived there with their families, children, and so on. They again talked about the effort to stay there. Obviously, economically, it's quite difficult. The effort to learn Eastern Armenian and understand Armenian that they're not used to. Again, very understandable, isn't it? But also the fact that in Armenia, maybe not now, but when I was doing this study and when they moved to Armenia, which is about 10 years ago, they still felt that they are other. They're not quite the Armenians that maybe Armenia was hoping them to be, or so there was a bit of that duality, like I don't know where I stand, I'm not quite sure, am I Armenian enough, am I not Armenian enough for you? So that still continues even with repatriation. But what is more important for me, first is that it was quite interesting that I saw a shift, and I forgot to say this, shift in younger generation when they repatriating and why they're doing that. So there seemed to be, we're moving away from financial contribution to more in-person contribution and being ingrained in Armenian politics and everyday life. So all younger generation Armenians I spoke to were saying that, they don't want to donate money. What they want to do is to actually go, understand the country, and see what they can do. Majority of them volunteered in Armenia, and many of them decided to stay after that. And that seems to be a shift from earlier generations. There are various reasons for that, of course. You know, you couldn't travel as much back then and so on and so forth. It was Soviet time, then it was 90s. Not the best place to go when you don't have electricity, food, this and that. But it was quite an interesting journey. Then I started thinking, okay, so why do they want to move and contribute? Why would someone who never been to Armenia, third generation, born in USA, would want to move to Armenia? What is it that's bringing you back? Surely it's more than that, you know, that patriotism or whatever we call it. Surely there is more to it. And why exactly these people are moving and others aren't? And what I found is one common theme, which is not quite feeling content or belonging to the country where you're born, right? So majority of them talks about, for various reasons, not feeling at ease, for example in America, not agreeing with political system there, being worried about the future of America, let's say again, because many of them were from USA, and so on and so forth. So things that were important, for example, in case of America, liberty, you know, freedoms and so on, they viewed it as endangered now in America. So what was really happening is that majority of repatriates who move and decide to stay there, one of the reasons is that they disagree or they don't find themselves to fully belong to the country that third generation was born in, which is quite interesting. So first quote, for example, is the participant from America. Things that are cool about America, like liberty, freedom, human rights, people matter, people have rights, they are fading away. And they saw some sort of hope in Armenia. And of course this coincides with the political situation in Armenia as well. This is 2018-19. Armenia is moving in the right direction, I would argue, on every single front and in a lot of ways in spite of the government. A lot of them talked about sense of belonging, fulfillment, and saying that everything falls into a place. Now, my role there is to kind of try to understand what between the lines is said, really, because sense of belonging, what is that? You know, it's a very big concept and not quite clear what it means. And basically it was they were trying to say, I don't belong there, I mostly belong here. But doesn't mean I belong here as well. I don't know if it makes sense. They were saying, so far, all the places I've been, this is where I seem to belong the most. I had one participant who had a bucket list with all the countries they would visit, right? And they started with Armenia. They've never been in Armenia. They were like, well, I'll go and see what happens. I'll see the country and move on to the next country. They took a year to do that. They came to Armenia and they stayed there. Never fulfilled the bucket list. So they still to live there. When I was interviewing them, it was their 4th year. Now, to say that they will continue living there, I don't know. And repatriates, I don't know if they will continue living there, but that was their intention when I interviewed there. A lot of them talked about, you know, the feeling that I wasn't able to understand, they were saying. And that feeling basically was that it wasn't quite the right place for me, wherever I was. I don't know if you've ever came across to that, or it's something you experienced yourself, or you think, well, this is complete nonsense. That's fine as well. One of my participants came to live, went back to USA, and came back again, because they said when they landed, they didn't feel like it was their place anymore. I had participants a lot from Iran as well. And one of the extracts is here. I'm interested in development of Iran. I even encourage my friends to take part as much as they can because I'm not indifferent to the fate of the country. That is important, but I don't find it to be a home. I'm not missing Iran. Now, a lot of it can be part of what happened after revolution. You know, Iranians live in this kind of closed society in Iran after the revolution and so on. But it seems to be a very personal journey for everyone. But one of the moving factors is that you don't find yourself in the right place, although you're born in, by all the logic in your head, you should be finding yourself. That should be your right place. One of the last extract is from a participant from England, actually. Although I've lived in England more than I've lived in Armenia, she was retired, yet it's just a limited life for me there. I'll never feel British like the British. This lady came from Lebanon, yeah. So she married in England and then lived, I think, more than 40 years here before moving back to Armenia. Now, a bit more kind of serious stuff. While I was doing my research, I thought, okay, I'm done. And then the Velvet Revolution happens. So I thought, well, I cannot really continue without just talking to a few more people to see what is happening and how they view Velvet Revolution. I could not ignore this, basically. So I took a few more interviews while it was happening. I went into social media sites in particular, so I was observing social media intensely and collecting data, but it's not social media data analysis. Just wanted to say a few things about the Velvet. I don't know how many of you were informed about, like, how were you following the revolution?
I was there.
You were there. That's interesting. That would be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. But the rest, did you know? Not much.
I was there too.
You were there
too.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good. All right. I've managed to be there the last moments of it, but I was there in the square.
I received a huge flag of the Armenian flag.
Okay.
Signed by everybody who was
there. Wow.
I've still got it. It's a flag with silent people who were there.
It's quite interesting. I mean, it was an awful moment, I suppose, for everyone. But it wasn't the first, obviously, disobedience in Armenia, you know, since the independence of Armenia. But obviously, this was on a different scale. It was quite unprecedented, I think, since the independence of Armenia. For example, there was events of March 2008, as we all know. There were initiatives like, I don't know how much you know about them, but they called Sev Perut or Demem, I'm against it, there was a movement, and Electric Yerevan. Maybe Electric Yerevan is something that majority heard because it was very popular on social media. There were many photographs of people being, you know, hosed down, water, and so on. This, although they were quite popular, a lot of people gathered in Armenian, in the Republic Square. It wasn't quite a successful disobedience, really. Or you can say it's partially, it was successful. But these movements, since 2008 up until 2018, were quite important. And it was almost like a cycle of an experiment, if you like, political experiment. Or experimental decade, let's call it. What happened is that it seems from political analysis that a lot of scholars are suggesting that the government, as well as the opposition and civil movements, learned kind of very important lessons on public mobilization in the Armenian context. So moving from very violent events to more, when you go into Electric Yerevan, it almost feels like a celebration. You know, I don't know if you've seen pictures where people were making khorovats and, you know, all this music playing, they're gathering, and that's a protest. So that was a very important lesson that Pashinyan and his, you know, supporters analyzed and used for the Velvet Revolution. After all, there is a reason why it's called Velvet Revolution, you know, adopting Czechoslovakia's events as well. So that was very, very important. Velvet Revolution had a clear message, right? That was like a peaceful protest. You know, we don't want any harm, we don't want any blood. Most protesters were young people. That was clear as well. And that lesson was learned as well. Electric Yerevan movement, when the protests happened, they were all young. Majority of them predominantly were young people. And this was disseminated through social media. You know, the gatherings, what to do, certain actions and so on, through social media. So the lesson learned was that social media plays a crucial role in mobilization and political movements nowadays. And of course, this is how you know, they conducted the whole Velvet Revolution in those days, where, I don't know if you were following, but they were constantly online, and you could see how they move, what they do, very well organized and very well thought through. And what they understood is that cyber activism is very important in this day and age, and this is how you can actually progress political agenda. Obviously, we're not the first. Egyptians, Tunisians done that before as well, when they were preparing for the revolt in 2011. They've done that through various social media platforms. They also realized that it's a very good tool to engage diaspora as well, reach and engage diaspora in political activism in the homeland. This has been done again previously as well. Iranians, for example, Iranian second generation diaspora in America use social media to mobilize solidarity with the homeland. What is quite interesting is that during the Velvet Revolution, diaspora wasn't as involved, it seemed. I don't know if you disagree or agree with that, but from observations, it seemed that diaspora was taking a look from the outside, basically. They weren't sharing as many posts, they weren't actively engaged in that. Some were, but it seems like the vast majority weren't. And it's quite understandable as well, because a lot of the times, you know, diaspora is told, you know, they're trying to rule from far. That's another complex situation not to be in. But the war of 2020, this is where diaspora contribution was immense. Extracts are from repatriates in Armenia. I spoke to a woman who was quite surprised that diaspora wasn't involved in the revolution. Very few were participating, all watching it with goodwill. And she goes on to blame a little bit, to say, well, we saw what happened, basically. Another participant from diaspora said, you know, when I was watching it from far, my view was very skewed. When I came to diaspora, to Armenia, kind of put things into perspective. I don't know if your experience was the same, or...
involved actually.
Oh, okay, so that's wrong person to ask then. I don't know. Any thoughts on whether your views were skewed when you were here compared to when you went there?
Describe the word skewed. Makes a difference in feelings.
Okay.
Yes, I supported the violent revolution.
Yeah.
By all means.
Yeah.
And I still do.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think it was, again, the reason why it happened is because, it's obvious why it's happened. It's almost, no one is even questioning it. It's not about that. But I think what this refers to is that you see things from far differently, obviously, compared to when you're ingrained in the situation. So what it seems to me that when diasporans move to Armenia, they kind of start shifting and trying a bit more understand the locality and the politics involved and so on. And she's saying, I follow diaspora news, I understand now that they're completely on a different planet. It's a strong statement, but I think you can understand where they're going with this. What they think, how they present problems, social or economic issues, they miss the nuances. And this is what they mean by when you're not there, you're missing some important nuances.
Can't be in both places.
Sorry?
Can't be in both places at the same
You can't be in both places, that's absolutely correct. But I think it also talks about that complicated relationship between diaspora, home, those who repatriate, who don't, and what even is repatriation if you've never been. It's a whole conversation, never-ending probably. Now, different picture happened when the war started in 2020. This is where obviously the diaspora is very active, and understandably it's a fight for survival. So you could see social media was very, very active during those times. There were protests happening in person as well. But what's quite important, that majority of my participants again returned to that sense of being invisible. They were suggesting that war from here, from UK, again it seemed invisible. It seemed like nothing was happening. And their active participation was a way of, again, putting an effort to showcase what's happening. But again, that sense of, I'm not heard again, I'm not seen, nothing is reported, or if it's reported, they considered it to be limited reporting on the events, or if it was reported, they considered it to skew towards Azerbaijan's side more. So there were different perceptions of it. But one running argument was that we're not seen again. We need to make noise. We need to make sure we're seen. A lot of them were saying they don't even know where Armenia is, never mind Armenian conflict, or Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. What is it all about? Thousands of posts were shared, and what was quite interesting is that diaspora and Armenians were taking part in cyber activism. They were receiving a lot of abuse, verbal abuse from both sides. They were shooting various words to each other. It was a tense time. I think I followed BBC, let me find the article, BBC article. I think it's one of the first articles. Armenia and Azerbaijan fight over disputed Nagorno-Karabakh. And this was linked to their Facebook page. This article was shared 538 times, 1,000 thumbs ups, all these emojis and emotive icons and so on and so forth. It generated 900 comments, but those comments were between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. So it was a battlefield online, basically. What was quite interesting is when they were making comments, well, not all of them were about, calling each other names. That was part of it as well. But a lot of it was about educating each other. So Azerbaijanis and their supporters' comments were referring to UN resolution, Artsakh and Armenian population being majority of Artsakh, and also the referendum and the obvious right to self-determination. So there was a clear kind of movement there towards educating each other, back and forth, constantly. Along with facts, of course, came insults as well, but we'll leave it to the side. And this was a recurring theme throughout that time, actually. When I looked at all BBC articles, that was the main recurring theme. It went to a point where actually the human rights ombudsman of the Republic of Artsakh raised concerns about hate speech against ethnic Armenians and Armenophobia. So it's quite brutal during that time, particularly on social media, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter. Many accounts were attacked. I'm sure you've all heard about the events of the time. The amount of posts and reposts during that time, honestly, it was unprecedented, as far as I could tell. There was, of course, humanitarian, political, civil, and financial participation as well. And again, it shows how diasporic spaces are moving from in-person to also online spaces as well. So that's quite important as well. Shift from community face-to-face engagement to online engagement. There were a lot of calls, actually, I don't know if you about this, being careful in UK, for example. I don't know if you came across to this, being an Armenian, so trying not to be easily identified, because all of us have this haftelueng or will win on our Facebook pages and so on. A lot of people became target of cyber attacks and things like that. There were also concerns about, being a bit careful with outside, if you like, because it was a tense time. And I don't, thank you.
Thank you very much.
No worries at all.
Nice meeting you. And
thank you very much.
We need lots of like this.
Yes, we do.
Like a shame. Although it was in English, we were all Armenian, talking about Armenian diaspora. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Nice meetings. God bless. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Yeah, just second that.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, don't worry at all.
I don't want to repeat what he said, but I mean exactly what he said. I would love to stay longer because I have quite a few
No, don't worry
questions.
at all.
Quite a few questions in my head. A lot
Thank
of
you.
thoughtful thoughts. Well done, and lovely to meet you.
You too.
Sorry.
Have a lovely day. No, have a lovely day. Bye.
Yes.
Right, so what I'm trying to say here is that social media is now a space of visibility, basically. Again, this runs through the concept of being invisible, and social media, the experience we had with the war and with Velvet Revolution, it seems to be that space of visibility and maybe even future of diaspora communication. I'm not sure to what extent that can be the case, but there you go. What was quite interesting is that after the war, there was silence on social media as well. And again, as an Armenian myself, I can understand why that happens. There was silence within the Armenians in Armenia. There was silence of Armenians diaspora as well. I mean, what can you say, right? It's almost impossible position. What this showed is that social media is also a place of visibility, but also shows activity, but also shows where inactivity starts as well. I mean, I'll leave it to other people to research and think what they want to find out about it, but it's quite an interesting space. I don't want to be too much talk too much, and I understand it's a tiring process for people to hear someone talk for more than an hour. But what seems to be happening, just to close it really, is that, fortunately for us, the sense of invisibility seems to be continuing with the loss of Artsakh. It ignites that sense of, I'm losing again, and that's what my participant talked about. I'm losing again. I'm again on the losing side. I'm again invisible. Everyone forgot us again. You don't agree? That's absolutely fine.
It's more than that. Way more than that. The idea that you expect to be visible is absurd, because if you don't participate, you give the information to the world to understand who you are. Why do you expect to be visible? This idea that you're not looking at the government propaganda. The government propaganda that Azerbaijan has produced in the last 10, 15 years is to eliminate Armenia. Everything to do with it.